You know the nursery rhyme Humpty Dumpty? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That particular nursery rhyme sums up, in my estimation, the problem we face in our society at large with all of the fragmentation. Everything, in a sense, is fragmented, kind of like Humpty Dumpty, who fell off the wall and we couldn't put it back together again, that egg, if you will. And in our society today, one of the areas of fragmentation involves faith and science. Often they're seen as polar opposites, fighting against one another. We know of the culture wars. We know how people in the faith community and scientific community are seen at being at war with one another. And AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Multnomah Biblical Seminary have partnered together in a grant initiative to help prepare seminary professors and the students that they serve in helping to equip those students going into pastoral ministry to be more effective in engaging our scientific age, where there doesn't have to be this fragmentation. Religion at its core in the Latin is about rebinding a broken world. And that's really what the Christian faith is ultimately about. Jesus breaks down walls of divisions. He doesn't build those walls of division. We're not trying to erase any kind of distinction between the faith community and the scientific community, or between faith and science, but we are about breaking down faulty forms of division. And so with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, with science advisors, with seminary faculty, working with those science advisors, with administration and our students, pastors, we've been working toward developing an informed respect between faith and science, and where possible, to move toward integration. In this documentary, you're going to be hearing from seminary professors, from seminary students, from pastors, from science advisors, administrators, and the like, talking about the exciting venture we've been able to go on over the last few years with the American Association for the Advancement of Science in helping to rebind our broken world involving faith and science. I'm Paul Louis Metzger. I'm the director of New Wine, New Wineskins at Multnomah University and Seminary, and it's been my privilege to oversee this grant initiative in conjunction with the seminary and AAAS toward helping to prepare our seminary graduates for more effective ministry in a scientific age.
Where the world is right now is a total immersion in being scientific. I mean, anybody raised in this culture is a scientist. You can't escape that fact. You are a scientist because you know what electricity is. You know what the climate is doing. You know how it is that medicines are developed. I mean, you have a scientific mindset.
One of the things I see is that this younger generation of evangelicals doesn't want to think in terms of science as the enemy of the faith. They're super tech savvy, so they're very dependent upon science, and they really want to see the world of science and faith in partnership with one another.
I grew up with a dad who is a geologist, and so science was never scary to me. I didn't attend a church where science was seen as something to be avoided or mistrusted, but I think gaining that perspective, the fact that science was something that some groups of churchgoers are skeptical of, was really helpful in understanding some of the issues that go on with the church that maybe I didn't understand beforehand.
I grew up in, for lack of a better term, pretty fundamentalist Christianity in church, and grew up with the idea that the sciences were the enemy, and that you had to choose kind of the Bible or science. And as I grew and developed and my faith became more mature, I saw that for what it was, which I think is false.
I really grew up in the evangelical church, and there was always a real sense that certain questions about faith and science just shouldn't be asked. They were taboo, and I learned at an early age that it was often very frowned upon, or even when questions were allowed to be asked, they were only asked in a very defensive way with like real limitations on them. You couldn't actually be exploring.
There's people in my church who have had a great suspicion about science and how it relates to life. There are also new generation people coming into the church who have questions how science relates to Christian faith and life. They also wonder, how does science and the Bible meet up together?
Growing up, especially through public school, we didn't have much exposure to science plus religion together. And if you're going to raise your hand in a public school and ask, what does that mean in terms of the Bible, probably won't get a straightforward answer.
For many students, they feel like they're not free to ask those questions, and they have this hesitancy inside, maybe even questions about whether or not their faith can even answer them. And to be able to give them the freedom to open up, to be able to dialogue it in a free and engaging environment, builds faith rather than challenges it.
Years ago, Dr. Chin and Dr. Redmond was the dean at the time at the seminary, and Dr. Chin was doctor of ministry director. Now he's the present dean. They said to me, you got to really check out this grant opportunity that we can apply for to work with AAAS. It's in conjunction with our accrediting body, accrediting organization, the Association for Theological Schools. And this is the type of thing that New Wine could really get behind and really help to work with the seminary and steer a grant initiative to help train up pastors to be better equipped to engage our scientific age.
What excites me is the opportunity that we as a seminary have to actually help the church. I think the whole idea of this grant being able to help churches have conversations between congregants and pastoral leadership, to be able to talk about issues of science and recognizing that maybe these conversations aren't taking place. So as a seminary, we can actually be coming alongside the churches, coming alongside pastors and ministry leaders and exploring the questions with them, maybe even helping them frame questions, helping them frame their answers in light of a biblical perspective. And for us to be able to serve the church in that way is a great opportunity.
I think there's been a false dichotomy that has kind of grown up in the church between theology, church, following Jesus, and the sciences. And so I think most pastors go to seminary and get a robust education in how to study the Bible and theology and even some history, and the sciences are kind of left off to the side. And so I think in a world that is becoming more scientifically inclined, and that mentality is being threaded in almost everything, I think it leaves pastors at a deficit.
It's my belief that religions, in order to continue to do what they have done for millennia, must adapt and be flexible to the modern world. To keep serving the same mission, we have to change what we do. And it's exciting to see the seminary look for ways to integrate the scientific challenges that the students encounter in the world into a curriculum that prepares them to be pastors, but prepares them to be pastors in a modern world where the questions they're going to get are going to be quite different.
Our world is changing dramatically, and we aren't in a luxury situation to just be comfortable and just ignore some of the big questions that are happening in our society, in our culture, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, and how to live well within a community with grace and compassion.
There's now an environment and an atmosphere fostered for the engagement with science. There's an environment and atmosphere for integration. We're not looking to engage science from the standpoint to disprove or tear down, but we're looking at science as a partner in the dialogue of theological studies.
And to bring science and theology more into an integrated dialogical relationship with one another is what the pastor needs to do in order to address particularly the younger people that he wants to bring into the Christian faith. So I find it totally exciting that this seminary and the AAAS have worked together to improve and increase the possibilities for pastors to be given the tools to make science and religion work in a practical way.
Evangelical Christianity's posture towards culture, society, science, the world has often been kind of an us against them posture, and it's not helpful. Here at Multnomah, partly as a result of New Wineskin's the Institute for Cultural Engagement, we really are committed to taking this posture of dialogue with all the elements of contemporary culture, recognizing that while we have something to give, we always have something to learn as well. And that's the kind of posture that we need to have towards science, this recognition that we have something to learn from science, even as theologians, as biblical scholars.
I was so appreciative of how our science advisors and the American Association for the Advancement of Science showed respect for us as seminary professors, as people who are in the biblical studies sphere, the theological studies sphere, pastoral studies sphere, and the like. They modeled this desire for respect. And I think that really helps, because so often you hear how the scientific community looks down upon the faith community. We saw nothing of that. In fact, just a real desire and inquisitiveness and a sensitivity to us as seminary profs seeking to serve our student body and pastors in training.
We had selected faculty members and consultants working together, trying to craft a way in which we could talk to one another and create curriculum changes that would bring more science into the classroom. So those seminars among the faculty and administration and the science advisors and the consultants from AAAS themselves, that was an arena where I saw things really happening at a professional level, a deep, sincere, respectful interaction that was top-notch.
The Multnomah faculty actually brought their syllabi and opened them up for discussion. I'm a faculty member, and I know opening up your syllabus for someone else to comment on is a particularly sensitive issue. The syllabi are where we live. These are documents we've spent years honing and structuring and angsting about and altering and making a little bit better and a little bit better. And to be invited into a room along with Robert Potter, the other science advisor, and have a bunch of seminary faculty actually open up their syllabi and say, this is what I do, this is how it's structured, let's talk about ways in which science could be incorporated into that. That was a very exciting and a very generous process to be part of.
My course is a course in the theology from the 16th century through the 19th century, mostly in Europe, which is a perfect course for this, because we deal with the European Enlightenment, which is really the philosophical background of the scientific revolution, which we deal with as well. And so the students read a lot of primary material. They're drawn into the work of scientists and theologians who, even when they disagreed, did not see each other as the enemy.
Whether it be neuroscience or social psychology dealing with moral intuitions, that was something that came into play with my ethics course. And when it comes to the matter of theology, contemporary theology, which was another course I taught, we dealt a lot with the theme of the God of the gaps. There's a whole historiographical account of how Christian history has been framed in the rise of modern science, that somehow or another God was always offered as a stopgap measure. When you didn't have an answer in the history of Christianity for understanding the natural world, you just put God in there to fill the gap. And then as science arises, modern science develops, then God is retreating. You don't need God anymore, God's displaced. And so I think one of the things that helped us to see in going through the course material is that the narrative historically is a lot more complex than that.
One of the most influential aspects of just that learning process of faith and science in class was seeing how historically faith and science have worked together kind of regardless of the type of science, for so long, science and faith kind of went together. And seeing when and how that diverged was very helpful for understanding some of the contemporary issues that the church seems to have with the scientific community and with science in general.
I think what we've done in some ways is very unique here. When I started working on this history of the interaction of science and religion course, I went to look for curricula of other schools just to see what they had done. And I really found, I don't think I found any from what I call conservative evangelical seminaries at all. And in fact, when we had a professor here from Wheaton, and I described the course to him, he said, "Oh wow, I wish we had a course like that here."
The seminary faculty now are not suspicious of science, and the seminary faculty is very powerfully at work to try to show each and every student that the world around them is a wonderful place to look at, to measure, and to consider how they can use the world around and science to better communicate religion and faith. There doesn't need to be a conflict between the two.
We were never required to give an answer or to convince someone that their faith could answer a question. And there are times where you can sit back with a student and honestly say, this may not be a matter of faith. It may not be that faith necessarily has to answer this question. Faith encompasses all of life, but it doesn't have to provide the answer to that particular scientific question. And I think that was one of my fears in the beginning when we started exploring this partnership. And that fear was completely unfounded, and it provided an excellent platform for those kinds of conversations with students.
We as faculty, we were the ones that were in control of the curriculum for our classes, and as we did that, we were allowed to just and free to stay fully committed to the historic Orthodox Christianity that we at Multnomah hold to. There was no need for any of that to change, which is incredibly beneficial for our students, so they can understand they don't need to move away from the things that they hold to be dear about the truth of Christ, the truth about the Bible, in order to engage science well.
Some perspectives from classes and just conversations at the seminary that have really left an impact on me is that there is no true tension between science and religion. It's a tension caused due to ignorance. I believe that if theology can be described as language and commentary on the life of God, then science is the language that scores the melody to which life dances to. And so that's the impression from seminary that sticks out to me as we engage science.
Well, I've seen this partnership in the conferences that Multnomah Biblical Seminary has held here. Conferences that I don't know of any other seminary in the area that have been addressing issues like this. I think it also elevates the academic quality of our campus. So often seminaries avoid these kinds of issues and they don't discuss them. Yet seminarians go out into a world where these are the constant questions they're going to face. And the one place that they can get answers to how the Bible and how religion and how science can partner together for the common good is right here. This is really the place to come when it comes to addressing those issues.
The conference that we had on faith and science was a highlight in the sense that we tend to dichotomize faith on the one hand, science on the other, and yet in many of those conversations I was moved to an amazement at the nature of God as it is displayed within the context of these various scientific fields. All truth is God's truth. There's an awareness that these men and women who have spent their lives devoted to that aspect of study contribute immensely to the discussion. And while I like science, I realize on a humble level that I don't have the capacity to engage on that level in the same way that they do, but I can contribute on the side of Hebrew Scriptures, and I can ask the questions about how that addresses. And we can't have the conversation in isolation. We can't even reach an understanding in isolation.
Peter Dodson, a paleontologist, was brought out from University of Pennsylvania to speak about his work as a paleontologist. And Peter is an extremely committed Christian. I know him very well indeed. And being able to see an audience open to a Christian paleontologist explaining how his professional life and his religious life worked together in the world without conflict, and having a whole room of people at Multnomah listen to this and then be open to it and applaud him. I thought, you know, this is a terribly brave step to take. This is difficult. But with respect on both sides.
As I've engaged in the science forums that we've done, it's really impacted me as a pastor because it's given me a better thirst for science and to embrace it more so instead of being at odds with it. And because I've had prior schooling, I've always been very familiar and happy to embrace science. But I think there's been elements in the Christian community where we've tried to pick fights and say, well, is it this many years? How many years has the earth been around? Has it been thousands of years? Has it been billions of years? And the paleontologist that spoke on that issue really gave me some good insight.
I had the opportunity to tie this into my own experience as I emceed the New Wine, New Wineskins and AAAS conference on church and science. I got to firsthand not only facilitate the conference, but also sit in and observe these experts speaking about these fields that are brand new to me. So this was an opportunity for us as a student body, as a church body, or just a general community to come and have this knowledge brought to us and to have it so accessible is something I'll always value.
The second forum was on the church and mental health. And that's something that is very personal to me. I have close family that have been through depression and bipolar and mental illness, so it hits close to home. And how do you follow Jesus and walk through these dark paths and dark valleys? That forum that night was just exploring that and having conversations. And in the crowd were healthcare professionals and were family members of people that have struggled with mental illness. People were there that night that struggled themselves with mental illness. So I hope it was beautiful for them to have their church and a local school and people from the community gather together to say, how can we better support folks that are journeying through this really, really difficult and dark path.
Who has those conversations? I mean, I know in my own church, I really haven't heard many things like that. And I dare say there are probably other congregations who haven't had these conversations about issues, say, concerning mental health, concerning old age. What do we do? How do we as a church respond to some very real issues that maybe people are actually uncomfortable having, and maybe they just need help entering into difficult conversations, entering into places where you think you have an answer, and maybe that's not the only one. But the idea of being able to press into things that are difficult, being able to press into things that nobody really wants to talk about, those are great opportunities.
I participated in 5 different workshops where we went to congregations and spent an hour to 2 hours in evening time talking about various aspects of science and religious interaction, particularly in the fields of mental health and in the fields of political interaction of the day. So those were the 3 arenas where I saw it being worked out in a very practical way. Within the seminars, within the faculty and administration and consultants, and within the student body at large, and out in the churches. And I thought all 3 of those were well-developed ways in which we could take the ideas out of the ethereal and high abstractions and bring it down to a practical level where people can see just how it is that science and religion can reinforce one another and be a practical avenue for sharing the Christian faith.
I'm very excited about where we can be going now with the work that's been laid down with the grant. I think there are a lot of opportunities that we as an institution have to interact more with the church and with science, and to be able to reflect on the conversations that we've had in the past, and to partner with churches to press into more issues concerning science and concerning faith. I come from a science background, but here I am at a seminary. I've been a pastor. I understand what it can look like, and I think we've set up perhaps a false dichotomy where it's science versus faith, when the reality is they don't have to be opposed. They can work hand in hand.
Most people don't expect to see faith and science in the same title, and so just that in and of itself, having that conversation, starting that conversation, having it be a catalyst for people's questions and their misnomers and their doubts, and just bringing that out into the light, into the open, in and of itself is beautiful. And I think the church should be leading the way. And my hope is, even in our local community, our church, the broader community, that it opens up conversations and new ways of looking at things.
One of the things that Dr. Stephen Combs from the University of Portland, our science advisor, mentioned was that helped me considerably in terms of thinking about religion or faith and science, was the fact that science gives us a map, a beautiful map of the things that we can sense, the things that we can see, touch, feel, measure. And there are gaps in the map, but they're getting filled in. It's becoming more complete all the time. And so he described this science, which he clearly loved, in that way. But then he said, but what science doesn't give us is a compass. It doesn't really tell us how to live in that landscape. It just gives us the landscape. It doesn't show us a direction to go. That really helped me to think about how science and faith, really, in a way, we're dealing with the same stuff.
I think continuing the dialogues is absolutely key, especially with the faith and science conversation. There's a lot of other dialogues we can be having too, but the faith and science conversation is a very, very important one. And in those conversations, the other thing that needs to happen, and this is something besides inviting the conversation and being willing to have the conversation, the other thing that we specifically as a seminary can do is promote in our students, and especially in ourselves, a great sense of humility. Not just humility that, hey, we aren't the scientists, but humility that in our own work as scholars, we don't necessarily have all the answers.
I think that has been a breath of fresh air, and I would really love to see the seminary and New Wine and Multnomah University just push further into that, to being a real resource to our communities that are really grasping for understanding. We live in a culture here in Oregon that's just really being bombarded with so many views and so many different complexities that I think it's vital for us to be aware and alert and informed. And we just can't cloister into the comfort of a country club mentality. We have to push into really being real in the communities that we live in.
I think we have a long way to go in becoming more sensitive, developing greater awareness of cultural diversity. And I think working with scientific disciplines, we as a Christian community, as a seminary community, can do a lot more to increase our sensitivities, our empathy, our emotional intelligence. And I think cultural diversity issues, health issues, including mental health issues, matters of emotional intelligence and empathy are areas where I think we've grown through this particular science grant, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think we need to remain hungry to learn, to be inquisitive, not inquisitional related to science or matters of faith or other cultural contexts, but to really engage biblically, theologically, in keeping with our faith tradition, and to move forward through that to engage matters of science in a very robust, constructive manner.
I believe that science offers theology a wealth in knowledge and ideas. It gives language to the complexities of social science in regards to gender, ethnicity, and race. And so I believe that the next steps for our seminary to move forward is to engage in conversations and dialogues and viewing science as an ally in reference to cultural diversity.
To have this conversation where we both are not adversarial in nature and bringing people from the outside in that are not just in the faith, but bringing many groups in the community together to see where we have common ground, to talk about how science is a tool for all of us to live effectively in our environments, to appreciate this wonderful earth that God made, to appreciate each other's perspectives even when they're different from our own. And so I think science is a wonderful tool in the inroads for us to make connections with culture and the community to be able to really embrace our neighbors like Christ told us to do.
You ought to keep repeating that, because you keep another layer of new students and another layer of acceptance. I think we can continue to repeat some of what's been done already. I think working in the classroom to constantly rehearse the progress we've already made, all of that's important. I think in addition that there is an opportunity to take the whole notion of science and examine what science is about. Because for me, when I've examined science more closely, I have realized that science has something to learn from theology, just as theology has something to learn from science.
Science and religion are two of the most powerful forces in the world. Why would we want to keep these forces separate from one another? As a Christian theologian who wants to see the world be a better place, wants to see the values of my Christianity brought to the world to make the world a better place, why wouldn't we want two of the most powerful forces, science and faith, science and religion, to partner together to make these kinds of things happen? And that's the kind of posture that we need to take going forward.
The relationships that we've established because of this grant, the Science and Seminaries grant, would deepen, that students leaving Multnomah would be excited about the way that science and faith can work together, that they would be excited and anticipating conversations with potential church members coming in saying, you know, I grew up afraid of science, but gosh, I just don't think I can ignore X anymore. Can you help me understand this question I'm asking, or this thing that I'm hearing from the scientific community? Is it okay to believe that? Working through those challenges are what make us stronger Christ followers, better leaders, better pastors, better image bearers.